So, I guess we're supposed to ask questions of each other, maybe talk a little bit.
Sure, well, why don't you introduce your book?
Okay, so, the Course of Dragons series is an epic fantasy series that was basically me waking up one day and saying, I want to write more about dragons. Although it does have a lot of dragons, but it was me playing with the chosen one archetype. I kind of wanted to address some of the ideas of, maybe if the chosen one is picked to destroy or save a kingdom, is that necessarily a good or bad thing, or does that kind of depend on where you're coming from on it, what the perspective is? Is it in fact possible that being picked as the chosen one could be the worst thing that would happen to you, and what would that look like? The main character finds out that in the first book, found out that he in fact was a long lost prince, and then found out that rich people are not necessarily kind people. So maybe that was not better than his old life. And then further finds out he's in the middle of just all of this chaos and mayhem. And then so we continue on with that with book 2, which also further explores some of the other people that he had briefly met in book 1 and how they kind of fit into the whole story. So it's he's there, but it's also a little bit more of a focus on another kingdom in the empire and the people that are there. That's basically it.
Plus there's dragons.
I have a city-sized dragon made of swords, so.
It's not a dragon I would want to meet. Okay, so Fate of the Fallen is the first book in the Shroud of Prophecy series, which is my second series, and so it's an interesting exploration of the chosen one trope. Jen and I realized that that's probably why they put us together, not just the fact that our books came out pretty close to each other. I think yours came out maybe a week or two before mine.
Yeah.
Mine just came out this week. So, except for mine asks the question, what happens when the chosen one fails? What happens when the prophecy, the one path to salvation does not come to pass, and what do we do then? So it's a pretty weird and chaotic kind of book. A lot of people are just ready to give up, and some people are maybe going a little crazy, and other people are dying, and other people are already dead. And so there's some really strange characters. I can't really go into too much of it without giving a lot away. So just know that there's gods and reapers and fae and wizards and witches and sorcerers and all kinds of magical things you could want to see in a fantasy, and maybe a little bit of humor as well. So that is what Fate of the Fallen is.
All right. So I don't know. Should we talk about humor? Because we were talking about humor earlier today.
Yeah.
And how we both have a lot of humor in our books, and how people seem to be often taken aback by that, like they're surprised.
Yeah, well, they're both from it seems like they're both kind of grim, dark fantasies. So it does surprise people when it makes them laugh, because we just have dark sense of humor.
I think that gallows humor is like a real part of the human condition, and anytime things are really super grim and awful and terrible, somebody's going to crack a joke. Mm-hmm. It's probably going to be a really puerile joke. Mm-hmm. And that's just it's human nature. So
yeah, and I really enjoy the unexpected. So there are more than a few scenes in the book when you're just going along and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, what just happened here? So I think it's fun to just kind of shock you every once in a while, make sure you're paying attention. Oh my goodness, come up with a subject. Well, let's talk about magic. How's your magic?
Okay.
I like magic.
Yeah, no, that was, I have to admit, there's definitely some parts of my books that were kind of written in rebuttal to certain trends in fantasy. Not necessarily trends in fantasy now, because truthfully I started writing these books a long time ago, but trends in fantasy back when. And one of them was a real movement towards low fantasy, a real movement towards we're going to be super realistic, magic is going to have very little presence, everything is going to be the emphasis on an often radically incorrect idea of what medieval life was like. And so I very purposefully went the opposite way. Let's lots of magic. I want to see magic used prosaically. I want the economy to incorporate magic. I want, if this is a thing that people can do, people will waste no time monetizing it, because that's also how people are. So that was really important to me. And as a result, magic is it's actually pretty well understood in a lot of ways. There's money to be had. So, but I developed a couple of different magic systems that I use, and I have, because I am me, I've put a lot of work into developing the rules to those magic systems, but then I don't explain it to you, because you gotta keep some mystery.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm one of those people that, writes everything up and does the maps for everything and has all the notes on it all. So
I think we always know a whole lot more about the world than we let on.
So what about you?
Yeah, so mine has quite a bit of magic in it as well. There are a certain number of lineages that possess magic, and each of them approaches the concept of magic from a different perspective, because magic becomes watered down with each consecutive generation. And so there are some who choose to profit from their magic, others who want to try to save it, others who just want to research it, and anyway, this goes on. And then there are different types of magi that use magic in different ways, and that's discussed a little bit, but in this book it doesn't go into a lot of detail with that. And then there are magical creatures who use it in a completely different way from what the humans understand, and so that kind of takes a bit of a role in this book. And then we have the gods, who just have all kinds of power, but they're also very petty, and so the ways in which they use their powers is a little ridiculous. And it does take a lot of time poking fun at prophecy. I really enjoy the idea of the prophecy, and how people kind of approach it in this book is probably a little different than other people in a lot of books.
They sent us on tour because
they knew us better.
Yeah. Like, these two have to meet. We're gonna put them on tour together. So let's see. Let's talk about unreliable narration.
All right.
Because that's always a thing that I have a lot of fun with. My books are diegetic, meaning the books themselves exist within the world of the books. The person who has within the world of the books, I didn't write the books, somebody else wrote the books. And that person is a character, or two characters actually, because the first two books are written by two different people. But as a result, they lie. They lie, characters within the stories lie. Just because one person says a thing is true does not mean that thing is true. And as much as I really like it, and I like having, for example, the narrator pop in with a footnote and say, yeah, that thing that the main character just told you that's not actually a thing. He's wrong. I some of my readers love it, and some of my readers are like, you're making me think too much, and I don't like that. How do you feel about use of unreliable narration?
Oh, I think it sounds, the way you've done it, I think it sounds really fun. I'm looking forward to actually reading the series. In my books, I don't have these great footnotes that you've referenced, but I do have multiple perspectives. You see it a little bit in book one, and then it kind of grows in book two, and you see what's going on from the perspective of the humans that live in the world of the main character. You see the perspective of the quote-unquote enemy, and then you see the perspective of the gods, and then the people who cross between those worlds. And so how each of those groups perceives what's happening is obviously very different, and so you might choose to take a different side than the main characters. You never know.
So let's talk about that. Or can you talk? So more than my books, I think your books have an issue with it would be very easy to spoil them.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And we do not want to do that. But can you talk about your villains? And whether or not they're really villains, or are they just opponents, which is a different.
Well, and like I said, that's really a matter of perspective. Of course, the way the book is written is from the perspective of these this band of characters who are leading this path to salvation, but the opponent, who is really trying to carry out the will of the gods. And so if you are a very religious sort and you think the God's will is what should be, then our main characters are going to be the enemy. And whereas if you think that whatever the gods want is wrong, then you might think that they should be fighting against the gods. So it matters what your perspective is. So.
Yeah, I remember really early on I had this conversation with my editor, and she made a comment about there being two sides, and I was like, oh, you sweet summer child. There are not just two sides. That is not what is going on here. But I do think a lot of times, particularly in epic fantasy, we have a tendency to try to polarize everything into black and white. And so I think one of the things I like about both of our works is that we are not doing that. Mm-hmm. There's more sides than that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have people in my books who are absolutely evil. There's no question. These are bad people. But I also have people in my books who are bad people, but for reasons they think are just and true. So, it's a little more complicated.
Yeah, this first book maybe is a little bit more polarized because it's the introduction and you haven't met all of the significant characters yet.
Right.
It becomes a little muddier by the second book, which isn't out yet, of course.
Trilogy, right?
It is supposed to be a trilogy.
Maybe. We'll see.
We assigned it a trilogy.
Yeah. We'll see.
If we're having fun, you never know.
Well, I mean, there could always be follow-up.
Exactly. It's and that goes into the concept of world building. This one is a very detailed world. I really enjoy building big worlds, and this one even has alternate realms, and so there was a lot of room for stories to kind of spin off of this, and I think it's a really interesting world. So, there's a lot of details, a lot of different cultures, and I think that in addition to the story that this follows, it's just a fun world to write in. So there could always be more.
Which is always good. I feel the same. You spent, particularly, you spend all this time developing a world. You don't necessarily want to leave it right away. And while my books are set to be a series of 5, and that's enough for me to tell this story. There's stories that we're never going to get to. We're not going to get anywhere near, and maybe Tor will help me tell those too. That'd be nice. Do we want to open it up for questions? Do we want to?
Good. Questions?
Yeah. We can do that.
So I have a question. So it's kind of for both of you, but also since you were alluding to the second book. So my question is, have you written all, this is your second already in the series. I don't know how far ahead you go, if you've already gotten 2 ready and you're ready to do 3. But if you have a big gap in between each one, how do you keep track of what happened in the previous books? Keep an internal consistency. Did you for the second book have to go back and reread The Ruin of Kings, or?
Well, my books are being released 10 months apart,
Mm-hmm.
There's not going to be a big gap. So that's just not a thing that's going to happen. But I do have a wiki, a personal wiki, that I keep all of my facts on,
Mhm.
kind of use for consistency and all of that. But also, I've apparently dumped massive amounts of real-world information to just store characters and names and things in my head. So apparently, that was the trade-off I made. It was just, but I do keep a lot of notes because, you do have to go back and say, what did I want to have happen here?
Mm-hmm.
I'm currently writing book 4.
Oh, so you're pretty far ahead then.
And
Mhm.
that's, I think, what you have to do if you want to release 10 months apart.
Yeah.
It takes the traditional publishers a while to do that. I'll be finishing up book 2 this month.
Mm-hmm.
I know where book 3 is going to go. I just have to make sure book 2 takes it there. And I do keep notes, but the story never really ends for the author. For the reader, some people are really fast readers and might read it in a couple of nights. Other people might take a few weeks to read it, and then that's it, and then it ends. But for the author, the story continues. It's in our minds. We're thinking about it all the time. We have to construct it. We have to figure out what's happening, and so even though it feels like there's a big gap in publication, it never really ends for us. Just kind of live in that world. I have another series, King's Dark Tidings, that I'm writing concurrently with this one. 2 completely separate worlds, completely separate magic systems, characters, everything. So I kind of have to keep those organized in my mind. And sometimes when I'm writing, I might accidentally switch a word, and I have to go back. No, wait a minute, that's not this world. So I have to, kind of keep glancing at my notes for that reason. But really, it's pretty. That's just the crazy way my mind works, and probably a lot of fantasy authors.
Yeah.
We keep so much of it in our heads. It's just designated as 2 different places. Visiting different places on vacation.
Yeah, and I will say too, I'm starting to write book 4 right now, but I'm editing book 3. So it's not like I don't see the book again until publication. No, it's hitting my inbox on a pretty regular basis, and so that's a kind of continual refresher. So I don't need to reread it. I have people making me do that.
Right, yeah.
Plus, we're asked numerous times to write synopses and summaries for interviews and publications and submissions. So we get to revisit it quite often.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Do you have a program that you use for like your wiki?
So I've used DokuWiki, which is a free. It's really nice actually because it's not super technical, so you can put it up and get it running without like having to be a website expert. And then I've started playing with World Anvil, which is an online wiki program that I think was kind of originally meant for like D&D DMs and stuff to create their worlds on, but also has a lot of use for writers. And I like that one a lot, although it is not free. So it has that disadvantage running for it.
Because I'm thinking long series, that's the notes have got to be crazy, and how to organize them and refer to them. And
There's a lot of notes, yeah.
I am far less cool. As a scientist, I'm very familiar with Excel, so I keep my notes in Excel.
There is nothing wrong with that.
I have a question. So in both of your books, you have like these really distinct, like within your very detailed worlds, you have like these really distinct societies, like and groups of people that have like all these rules and all these like social conventions and everything. And like, how do you go about like creating like such a distinct like people group within like an already really detailed like world that is so vast?
Well, I for one am a fan of cultural anthropology, and so I've read about a lot of different cultures, and so some of my ideas I pull from these different cultures and kind of combine them together to create something unique. Also, I'm just kind of weird, so I like to just make stuff. Well, what if they do this? And how would my characters react? And that's hilarious, so let's do that.
I've been a DM for a really long time. And, honestly, part of my introduction to all of this was as a 10-year-old, having read The Tombs of Atuan for the first time and spending like the next 6 months making mazes because I thought that was just the most brilliant thing ever was the maze. So the idea of creating a new society is something that you do a lot in D&D, and it seemed really natural to go ahead and do it. And I love extrapolating out from certain base decisions. When I decided that the Joratees were going to be a very horse-centric people, I then had to figure out what that meant, and not just horse-centric from the fact that they love horses, but horse-centric from the fact that they had been ruled by a god king who loved horses and who had maybe made them a little horse-like, like unusually horse-like. And what was that going to do, and how was their society going to evolve from that? And it was just, it went in some unexpected directions that I really had a lot of fun with, including, some decisions about gender that frankly had not been something I'd originally intended. It just made sense that would be how that they would interpret that. I had a lot of fun figuring out the economy of Jorat, which ended up being very weird. So I think mostly it's just this, like what you said, you have to have this love of culture as a whole and willing to evolve a culture with what works within it without just saying, oh, well, this is how France was in the Middle Ages, so that's what we're going to use. I don't think that's nearly as much fun.
And it's also important to note that the author doesn't always agree with what's happening in the culture.
Oh God, yeah.
Of
Just because we create it doesn't mean that that's our belief system, or that we're condoning that behavior. Sometimes it's really bad, and we know it's really bad. It's just supposed to be that way because real life can be bad. So we don't necessarily condone the things that these cultures or characters do.
Now, am I right? I think I heard Ruin of Kings was your first book, published novel.
Yeah.
So how long? I mean, it's a 5-book thing. So how long were you sitting with that idea, and what was your inspiration for it?
Well, so the world that is set in is something that has been evolving in my life for probably about 30 years. And when my ex-husband dared me to write a novel, that was not the novel. But the second novel I wrote eventually became The Ruin of Kings. So that was probably 20 years ago. But I think that it's just been it's really hard when people ask me what was your inspiration for this. It's like, how do I distill the last 30 years into a paragraph? This was my inspiration. Like, no, man, it just I had the world first, and it seemed really like a waste not to put a book there, because I already had all this stuff. So yeah, let's go ahead and write a book set there.
And now 5.
And now 5, yeah.
I'm not sure what it is to be an author, but I imagine the things that go in you guys' minds when you guys come up with the ideas that you guys have. What I wanted to ask was, does this stop you from reading other people's stuff because you're worried, you're worried that it's somehow
No.
add to it?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Okay, you first then. Go. You talk about it. Talk about it.
All right. Well, no, there is some hesitation sometimes about not wanting to read things in your genre because you don't want them to affect your writing. Because sometimes you can inadvertently come up with an idea that you think is all your own, and you're like, did I come up with that, or did I read that somewhere? But ultimately, the whole story is never going to be the same as someone else's, unless you're intentionally doing that, of course. But mostly it's not so much that I don't want to read them, because I love epic fantasy. It's my favorite thing to read. Mostly it's that I don't have time to read them. I am so busy trying to get my own stuff done, do my own edits, plot out the next book, in this case multiple books because I'm working on multiple series. And then of course I always have those other ideas that keep nagging me to be written, and I don't have time to write those either. So I just have to kind of take notes on those and put them away. That I just don't have time to and sit down and read something as fabulous as this, even though I really, really want to.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I do know authors who will very deliberately not try to avoid reading while they are in the middle of the writing process, because they're afraid that, writing styles, writing tones, that those things will creep into their own writing, and they don't want that to happen. That's never been a problem for me. And I'm never not writing. So if I had to partition out reading until times when I wasn't, blocks of time when I wasn't writing, I would never read anything. So I don't do that. In terms of ideas, I am not, I don't think that, you and I cannot write the same book, even if we started out with the exact same synopsis of a book. Here is what's going to be, this is going to happen in this chapter, and this is going to happen in this chapter. They would still be completely different books, because I don't know of any author who does not put themselves onto the page, whether they mean to or not. And we just, you know, what is going to be interesting to me, the take I'm going to give to something is not going to be the same thing that you would take to something. So I don't worry at all about, oh gosh, so and so already came out with that idea.
That's what I worry about. This is probably one of the biggest reasons why I haven't read a lot of stuff in the past, because I didn't want to be accused of biting off anybody's.
Just the opposite. I think you should read as much as you can, because you're going to find out what you like.
That's true.
You're going to find out what you don't like. You're going to find out the things that that excite you about the genre. It really is a lot better if you try to read extensively. With
Oh
what
yeah,
you're doing.
I'm over the whole writing portion.
I started writing my King's Dark Tidings series after a long spurt of reading everything I could get my hands on. I read so much, and I decided to try to write a story that I would want to read. And so I was inspired by many different books I've read. You know, just picking out little pieces of stories or ideas that I really liked, integrating those into my story, not including things that I didn't like that happened in stories, and basically just created like an ideal book that I would want to read. And it worked apparently, because a lot of people also wanted to read it. So, yeah.
Speaking of which, we ever gonna get hard copies of those?
The question.
That was my question.
I keep getting asked that question. Yes, I can say for sure, yes, there will be hard copies.
Because I even asked him here, hey, can I order some for the signing?
There are no print copies of King's Dark Tidings at this time. It's only available in ebook and audiobook. And there's a reason for that, because as that series is self-published, but it has done phenomenally well. And as a self-published author, in order to create print copies, I have to charge an exorbitant price, because of the size of the books, for print versions that would not be the quality that you'd want to pay for. I do have, unusually, I have some publishers who may be interested in just doing the print rights. That doesn't really happen, because they usually want the ebook rights as well, and I've been unwilling to give those up. It would take away a lot of my ability to control what happens in the series, and I really want to keep that available for the fans. As you could tell with the Fate of the Fallen, which is published by Tor, and they've done a phenomenal job. I'm really happy with it. They are charging a lot more for the ebook than what I charge for my King's Dark Tidings series, which may have put it out of the price point for some people, and I want to keep it available for everybody. If none of those deals work out, if they don't, satisfy what I want to happen, I will do it myself. So it may not be as good a quality as something like this, if I have to do it myself, but I will try my best to make it as best as possible for the readers.